Greetings, YouTubeistas. This is March 7th, 2019. And if you've followed this channel, you'll know that I hit on specific themes here a lot. What's going to happen in the background as I talk is I'm paging through some pictures from my summer school course that I taught. It's just like a week course, hour and a half a day for some middle school kids, and they would file in and take their seats at this computer lab of very high-end workstations at Reed College. And I was lucky enough to have some prototypes, and the most recent prototype being called C60, some prototypes of Flextegrity. Flextegrity, these are synthetic lattices. They're load-bearing, they're like scaffolding, and they're being put out by the Flextegrity company. And so we had those to assemble. I also had this 24A modules thing ready to go. This is on my front porch. I made a whole prototype myself so that I knew in advance that the kids would be able to do this. I'd succeeded in this kind of thing with a sixth grade assembly at my daughter's school. We all got together and folded A modules into left and rights. I didn't really say do it left, do it right. I just had, I think as my recollection anyway, it was a long time ago that we did this. We made this A modules also make what are called mites with a B module. So all this kind of stuff, it's very esoteric, and I think what you're asking yourself maybe here in March of 2019 is, yes, it's very interesting that there's sort of a revolutionary movement, you could say, something that wants to implement change in the world that sort of bases itself in this arcane alternative approach to thinking about geometry. Like, who saw that coming? Almost always when we talk about rival isms like socialism or capitalism, there's nothing connecting to like a revisioning of basic polyhedral kind of stuff doesn't enter into it. So this is interesting, at least, in that it has artistic implications. Like, you would think if this was going to go anywhere, we would see evidence of that in the art world. We would look around and say, wow, the world really has taken inspiration from this. And I would argue that it has. You just have to know what you're looking for. I don't think it's as hopeless as it seems. But on the other side, here I am, the lone Fuller disciple, sort of, with my little one class at Reed College. It's very cool. It's very high end. There's where they got to sit, right? They're all Apple workstations, very powerful. So these were very privileged kids, you could say. And indeed, I would say these are the only kids in the entire world that summer, or really any time, that are A, looking at Fuller's geometry in any depth, and B, are getting to do so with these arcane artifacts that nobody else has, like this C60 here. And the World Cup was just going on that time, so it was all very thematically connected. Now, a lot of the kids, they didn't know exactly what they were getting into, where I call something Martian math. And it's very tempting for kids these days, if they're in the same room and could work together with games, that's how they like to socialize. Now, they didn't all, but I was kind of liberal because this is summer school, and I wanted them to have fun and listen to me. So it was kind of a bargain with the devil. You listen to me talk in the early part of the day as I give you some geometry, and then I'll let you play some games later. So I didn't really, turn this into a hard course where they had tests or anything. This was, after all, just a summer school course. And that's what I'm suggesting a lot of you might be able to get going, like this coming summer even, because, hey, there are no textbooks for this. Big industry has turned its back on all this like unit volume tetrahedron stuff. As exciting as that may be to my subculture, my ethnicity, we're not paid attention to. We're kind of like the Quakers, right? Quakers were big in the 1600s, or actually they were small in the 1600s and got big in the 1700s and had a lot of political clout. It was, quote, sexy to like marry a Quaker, and nobility suddenly had no problem with them, and they got to run banks and insurance companies. Before you know it, Quakers were heavy duty, and it looked like Pennsylvania, the state, was going to be the Quaker state, and Philadelphia, a Quaker capital, and we were going to have a Quaker utopia on planet Earth, run according to Quaker principles, which meant, hey, we're not going to fight the native peoples here. We're not going to start a war with the, quote, Indians. That would be stupid, and there's better ways to go. But you know, boat after boat of European kept coming, kept coming. Talk about a throng of immigrants. Talk about a flood of immigrants across an uncontrolled border. Talk about Europeans just flooding over here. You know, getting documented, was that your first priority? You know, if you came as an indentured servant or a slave, you probably never got your citizenship, and then you had kids and so on. Anyway, it's always been a mess here. Who's a citizen? We don't wake up to history that much. It's like, whoa, people are flooding across the border. Well, that has been going on. Yes, indeed. There hasn't really been a nation here, certainly not one with a fence. If that's your idea of a nation that is completely fenced in like a prison, you know, where in the world has any nation completely fenced itself in? You could say, well, Israel, it's working there, and that's what the President of the United States seems to say. So we should all get used to that's the new model, and before long, the entire world will be strictly fenced off areas, and maybe we'll have world peace. Now, do you think that's likely science fiction? I mean, will that science fiction become science fact? In other words, science fiction has a big fictional component until you hit reality, and then it's whatever is so. Like what is so, that's not science fiction. That's, you could just say, pure science, I guess. But whenever any one of us opens our mouth, you know, we're not super omniscient. None of us, certainly not me. So I will say things that aren't true. Not because I'm trying to lie or anything, but you know, I speak a language that's already warped in various ways. I don't maybe even have the concepts to express the truth. Who knows? Anyway, as a mortal, special case human being, I don't take myself to be some great authority on all matters, because I know probably half the stuff I believe is total garbage. That's just, as you go through life, you realize that your belief system is a junkyard a lot of the time. So I don't put a huge stock or faith in like everything I believe is gold. No, that's not the case. Anyway, this Fuller stuff, though, I've been checking it out from many angles and does seem to hold water and does connect to positive futurism. Let me just end this with two show and tell exhibits. The first one being Critical Path. You may not know this book exists. St. Martin's Press. I believe it came out. When did this come out? St. Martin's Press. Kiyoshi Kuramiya was adjuvant. I remember looking that up in the dictionary. I did later meet Kiyoshi a couple times. We had some great times. I have My Dinner with Kiyoshi. Search that on the internet. Hopefully you'll find it. So this came out in 1981. All right. Very interesting book. Like I say, there's maybe some tall tales in the speculative prehistory, which is supposedly kind of masking a science fiction projection. Like, what if we as humans learn to telescan ourselves to other star systems? How would we do that? And what species might we take with us from here? That kind of thing. And as soon as you're telling a story like that about the far, far future with humans beaming to other solar systems, well, then you start asking, well, if that could ever happen in the future, couldn't it have happened in the past? And you're back into ancient civilizations and all that kind of that morass of speculation that we're used to from YouTube. You know, Chariots of the Gods is just the beginning. UFOs, star systems. There's so much, even involving telescanning. Like, I know there's a very straight-laced Big Bang, and then nothing, and then Earth, and then life appearing at the cellular level probably under the oceans and the vents and all that. And that's not the way Fuller tells it. But don't let that turn you off completely. In other words, get past the fact that he does call it speculative, and he does dedicate the book to like E. E. Cummings, and talks about this poetics that he so admires poets and so forth. He's not necessarily wanting you to read everything here in a literal sense, but I do want to read the poet's advice. I'm not saying it's dedicated to E. E. Cummings. That was inaccurate. But in the foreword, he's got that stuff about fighting, and also this opening sentence is important. Forward. It is the author's working assumption that the words good and bad are meaningless. Now that's a pretty bold statement, and this is based on science and not on opinion. Wow. And it kind of explains why he gets through all of world history without demonizing anyone in particular. You know, he doesn't even mention Hitler as far as I know. It's not like he didn't live through all that himself. He just wanted to give us a way, kind of a reference book that we could think about history using this kind of memory palace and other books. He knows he's, not the sole authority on history or anything, but he wants us to have a narrative that we can all sort of use as a touchstone if we want, and it doesn't have bad guys in it. In other words, we don't finish reading this and say, okay, now let's get up and get rid of the whatchamacallits. Let's stamp out those whatchamacallits so we can have a real civilization or whatever. It's not a call to arms. It's a call to, let's be smart. The other book, speaking of smart, that I would say is a sequel to Critical Path is Grunch of Giants, and definitely you'll want to check that out if you're interested in joining sort of the Bucky Fuller subculture. You've seen enough of the geometry to realize it would work in art school. It may not be the next physics, but it's got a lot going for it just in terms of core fluency around spatial concepts, frequency, special case versus um, generalized. Just the philosophy there is pretty succinct. In other words, you can get a pretty good package if you study this material and then link it up retroactively to anything else you're interested in, from Alan Watts to Christianity to sacred geometry. In other words, there's a shared core here, the concentric hierarchy with the S, A, B, T, E modules. Get fluent in that mathematically, and then you'll have a lot of skills to wrap around which you can wrap whatever else suits your fancy. I'm not here to tell everybody how to make their belief system. But I guess I am a constructivist in that sense that I think you have the freedom to do so. You can design your headspace in a lot of ways. And if you make mistakes, you'll find out, if you're too far off, then the world will keep punching you back. You'll notice that. So I'm not saying I know everything there either. The world's punching me back plenty. So I'm making mistakes here. And if you saw me fuddling through that mathematics recently, you saw that I am very mistake prone. We'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your week.